Imagine walking into a warm kitchen on a cold winter afternoon. You immediately smell a sweet and woody scent that makes you feel happy and calm. A small brown stick sits next to a cup of hot cocoa or a fresh apple pie. This is cinnamon, one of the most famous spices in the history of the world. While we can easily find it in any local grocery store today, it was once more valuable than gold. People loved its unique smell and taste, but for a very long time, nobody knew exactly where it came from or how it grew in the wild. Thousands of years ago in ancient Egypt, this special spice was used for healing and religious ceremonies. The Egyptians believed it had magical powers, so they used it to preserve the bodies of their kings and queens after they died. Its true origin remained a deep mystery for many centuries because it came from very faraway lands. Brave traders carried it across dangerous deserts for many miles to reach the Mediterranean Sea. Because the journey was so difficult, only the richest individuals could afford to buy it. It was a sign of great luxury and was often given as a gift to powerful gods in their beautiful temples. The Roman Empire was a place of great power and amazing beauty, where the leaders loved to show their success. These powerful people wanted the best things from all over the world to prove how rich they were. Among all the treasures they found, a brown bark from a faraway land was one of the most special. They called it cinnamon, and it became a symbol of extreme wealth that everyone in the city of Rome desired. Because it was very rare, only the most important citizens could ever hope to touch or smell it. This wonderful spice was worth more than gold in those ancient days. The leaders of the Roman Empire valued the spice so highly that they used it in very public ways. When a famous person died, the family would hold a massive funeral to celebrate their life. During these ceremonies, they would burn the precious bark on large fires. They did this to show their great wealth and high social status to the thousands of people watching. The sweet smell would fill the air of the city for many hours. To the Romans, wasting such an expensive item was the ultimate way to prove that they had more money than anyone else. One of the most famous stories about this practice involves the powerful and controversial Emperor Nero. When his beloved wife, Poppaea Sabina, died in the year 65, the emperor was filled with a deep and terrible sadness. He wanted to give her a funeral that the world would never forget. To show his love and his pain, he ordered his servants to bring out the entire city supply of the spice. He did not care about the cost or the future, because his heart was broken. He wanted the whole city to smell the sacrifice he was making for his queen. Historians say that Nero burned a whole year of the city supply of cinnamon on that single day. This was an incredible amount of spice that had taken many months to travel across the oceans and deserts. By burning it all at once, he showed the world that he was the most powerful man on the planet. The people of Rome were amazed and shocked by such a massive display of riches. It was a moment of pure luxury that proved how important the spice had become to the royal family. No other substance could represent his deep feelings quite like this. While it was used for funerals, the Romans also enjoyed using the spice in their daily lives. They loved to put it in their food and drinks to make them taste much better. Chefs in the big kitchens of the rich would mix the ground bark into heavy sauces for meat. They also added it to their wine to create a warm and spicy flavor that was perfect for cold nights. These special meals were served at long parties where guests would talk about the delicious smells. Using the spice was a way to show off to their friends and visitors. Because the spice was so expensive and hard to find, having it in your home meant you were part of the elite class. If a visitor entered a house and smelled the sweet aroma, they knew immediately that the owner was a person of high rank. It was not something that common workers or farmers could ever afford to buy. The elite Romans used it like a perfume for their bodies and their clothes as well. This helped them stand out in a crowd and reminded everyone of their high position. It was a very powerful tool for social climbing in the city. One of the reasons the price remained so high was that the Romans did not know where it actually came from. They bought it from clever traders who traveled from the east, but the origin was a total mystery. These traders told many strange stories about where they found the bark to keep the secret safe. The Romans believed the spice might grow in the center of the world or in magical gardens. Because they could not find the source themselves, they had to pay whatever price the traders asked. This lack of knowledge made the spice seem even more magical and rare. The Roman government spent a huge amount of gold every year just to bring these spices into the empire. Some leaders were worried that too much money was leaving Rome to pay for these luxury items. They saw the golden coins moving toward the east and never coming back. However, the hunger for the brown spice was too strong to stop. Even when the prices went up, the demand stayed very high among the senators and the rich merchants. It became a necessary part of the Roman way of life. The economy of the empire was deeply connected to these long trade routes. Compared to other luxury items like silk or pearls, cinnamon held a very special place in the Roman heart. Silk was beautiful to look at, and pearls were lovely to wear, but the spice appealed to the senses of smell and taste. It was something that people could experience with their whole bodies. This made it feel more personal and valuable than a simple piece of jewelry. When a person ate food with the spice, they felt they were consuming the power of the sun and the earth. It was a luxury that provided a true physical feeling of wealth and comfort. During the long and dark years of the Middle Ages, the secret of the sweet cinnamon tree was hidden from the eyes of the European people. Only the clever traders from the Middle East knew where this wonderful bark truly came from, but they were not willing to share their knowledge with the world. These men wanted to protect their busy trade and keep their profits as high as possible. Because the journey to the distant lands of the East was very dangerous and long, the spice remained a rare treasure that only the wealthiest families could ever hope to see or taste. To keep the secret safe, the traders invented many fantastic stories about how they found the spice. They told stories about giant birds that built their nests out of precious cinnamon sticks on the sides of high mountains. According to these legends, the birds were very large and very strong, making it impossible for humans to climb up and take the spice by hand. These stories were shared with travelers and explorers to scare them away from searching for the source. People in Europe believed these strange tales because they had no way to travel to those far and mysterious places. The traders told the Europeans that they had to use clever tricks to get the spice from the giant birds. They said they would leave large pieces of heavy meat on the ground, near the mountains. The big birds would fly down and grab the meat to carry it up to their nests. Because the meat was so heavy, the nests would break and fall to the ground. Then, the traders could quickly pick up the broken cinnamon sticks before the birds could attack them. This story made the spice seem even more valuable because it was so difficult and dangerous to collect. Other storytellers spoke of deep and dark valleys where the trees grew under the protection of dangerous monsters and flying snakes. They claimed that the spice was guarded by spirits that would kill anyone who tried to take the bark without permission. These terrifying descriptions served a very important purpose for the Middle Eastern traders. If the Europeans believed that the journey was deadly, they would not try to find the trees themselves. This allowed the traders to control the price and keep their power over the market for hundreds of years during the middle of human history. To bring the spice to the hungry markets of Europe, the traders traveled along the famous Silk Road. This was a very long path that stretched across hot deserts and cold mountains for many thousands of miles. Large groups of camels carried the heavy bags of cinnamon across the dry lands of Asia. These groups of travelers had to stay together to protect themselves from thieves and the harsh weather. Every step of the journey added to the cost of the spice. By the time it reached the Mediterranean Sea, the price of the bark was incredibly high for everyone. While some traders used the land routes, others preferred to sail across the wide Indian Ocean in wooden ships. They waited for the strong winds to push their boats toward the west, carrying the sweet bark from the islands where it grew. These sailors faced many risks, including great storms and pirates who wanted to steal their precious cargo. After a long time at sea, the ships would arrive at busy ports in Egypt. From there, the cinnamon was sold to merchants who took it to the grand city of Venice, which was the most important trade center in Europe. In the beautiful city of Venice, the spice was sold for prices that would shock us today. One small bag of cinnamon could be worth more than a whole house or a large farm. The Venetian merchants became very rich by controlling the sale of these spices to the rest of the continent. Kings, queens, and high church officials were the only people who could afford to buy it on a regular basis. Because it was so expensive, the spice became a symbol of status. If you had cinnamon in your kitchen, it meant that you were very powerful. During the winter months, the royalty of Europe held grand banquets to celebrate their power and wealth. They used the spice to flavor heavy meats like deer, pig, and cow. In those times, there were no refrigerators to keep food fresh for a long time. The strong and sweet smell of the cinnamon helped to hide the taste of meat that was not very fresh. It also added a wonderful flavor that made the food taste like a luxury. The guests at these parties were always impressed when they saw the brown powder being used so freely by their royal and rich hosts. Doctors in the Middle Ages also believed that cinnamon was a powerful medicine that could heal the human body. They taught that the spice was warm and dry, which could help to balance the cold and wet nature of many illnesses. It was often mixed with wine or honey to create a drink that was supposed to help with stomach problems or a bad cough. Because people believed it had these healing powers, they were willing to pay almost any price to get it when they were sick. The spice was a vital part of ancient medical science for many people. The world was changing very fast during the 16th century because many European explorers wanted to find direct routes to the markets of Asia. Before this time, the spice trade was mostly controlled by clever traders from the Middle East who kept the source of cinnamon a big secret from everyone. The Portuguese sailors were very brave and had strong ships that could travel across the wide oceans to look for riches. They wanted to find the exact place where the fragrant trees grew so they could buy the spice directly from the source. This would allow them to stop paying high prices to others and become very wealthy by selling the bark in Europe. In the year 1518, the Portuguese finally reached the beautiful island of Ceylon, which we now call Sri Lanka. This island was like a hidden paradise because it was the only place in the world where the finest cinnamon grew naturally in the forests. When the Portuguese sailors arrived, they were amazed by the sweet smell that came from the land, even before they stepped off their ships. They realized they had finally found the legendary home of the most valuable spice in the world. It was a historic moment that would change the destiny of the island and the global spice market for many centuries. The people living on the island had been harvesting the spice for a long time before the Europeans arrived. They understood the forest and knew exactly how to peel the bark from the trees without killing them. However, they did not see the spice as a way to gain global power or massive amounts of gold. The Portuguese met the local king and tried to make a deal with him to control all the trade. They wanted to be the only ones allowed to buy and sell the cinnamon. This agreement was the beginning of a very long and difficult period for the local island inhabitants. To protect their new and valuable discovery, the Portuguese built large and strong forts along the coast of the island. The most famous one was built in a place called Colombo, which became a very important center for all their operations. These forts were made of heavy stone and had many cannons to keep away any enemies who might try to steal the spice. By building these permanent structures, the Portuguese could control every single ship that entered or left the island. They wanted to make sure that no other European country could get even a small piece of the valuable cinnamon bark without their permission or paying very high taxes. The process of getting the cinnamon was very hard work that required many hours of labor in the hot sun. The Portuguese forced the local people to go deep into the thick forests to harvest the bark from the trees. These workers had to find the right trees, cut the branches, and carefully peel the thin inner layer of the bark with special tools. Once the bark was removed, it was left to dry in the sun until it curled into the thin brown shapes we recognize today. This work was dangerous because of the wild animals and the humid weather, but the Portuguese demanded more every year to satisfy the hungry markets of wealthy Europe. Because the Portuguese controlled the island of Ceylon, they had what we call a monopoly on the finest cinnamon. This meant that they were the only people who could provide this specific type of spice to the markets in Europe. They could set any price they wanted because everyone loved the flavor and the smell of the bark. The kings and queens of Europe were willing to pay a lot of money to have it in their kitchens and at their parties. This direct control brought an incredible amount of gold to the Portuguese leaders and made their empire one of the strongest in the entire world for many years. The Portuguese were very protective of their secret routes and their control over the island for many decades. They knew that other powerful nations like the Dutch were watching them with great jealousy. To keep their secret safe, the Portuguese sailors were very careful about the maps they used and the information they shared with others. They treated the cinnamon like a royal treasure that was more valuable than silver or gold. Any sailor caught trying to sell the spice on their own would face very harsh punishments. They wanted to keep the trade completely under the control of their powerful and rich king. Back in Europe, the arrival of large amounts of cinnamon from the Portuguese changed the way people thought about food and status. Even though it was still very expensive, it was more available than it had been during the Middle Ages. Noble families used the spice to show their guests that they had connections to the distant East. It was used in many ways, from flavoring sweet cakes to making perfumes that smelled like the exotic forests of Ceylon. The Portuguese' success in finding the spice source inspired many other explorers to set sail and look for new lands and more riches for their own countries. For about 100 years, the Portuguese remained the masters of the cinnamon trade and the rulers of the coastal areas. They spent a lot of money building churches and spreading their culture while they collected the spice. However, their strict control and the way they treated the local people created a lot of tension and many problems. Eventually, other European powers began to challenge their dominance with bigger ships and more soldiers. The story of the Portuguese in Ceylon is a tale of great discovery, incredible wealth, and the beginning of a global struggle for control over a simple tree bark from the forest. By the middle of the 18th century, the world was changing very quickly. Many European nations wanted to control the valuable trade of cinnamon. For many years, the Dutch had been the masters of the island of Ceylon. They had taken this power from the Portuguese people long ago. The Dutch were very strict and kept a close watch on every single tree. However, their power began to fade as a new and stronger force arrived from the west. The British East India Company was growing larger and more powerful every year. They were ready to fight for the delicious bark that made so much money. In the year 1767, the British started to change the spice market forever. They realized that they could not just wait for the Dutch to lose their strength. Instead, they used their massive ships and many soldiers to challenge the other European powers. This was a time of great conflict across the oceans. Many sailors and soldiers traveled thousands of miles away from their homes to fight in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. Every nation wanted to be the only one selling cinnamon to the rich families living in London and Paris at that time. The British were very clever when it came to business and organization. Before they arrived, most people simply looked for the spice trees growing wild in the thick jungles. This was a very slow and difficult way to collect the bark. The British leaders decided that they needed a better system to get more spice for their customers. They began to clear away the wild plants to make room for organized farms. These large farms are often called plantations. This was a major change because it meant the trees were now growing in neat rows where they could be easily reached and protected. Creating these huge farms changed the landscape of South Asia in a very big way. Workers had to spend many hours under the hot sun planting young trees and caring for them. The British East India Company hired thousands of local people to work on these estates. This new way of farming allowed the company to produce much more cinnamon than ever before in history. Instead of small amounts being carried on camels across deserts, huge wooden ships were filled with bags of the sweet-smelling bark. This made the British very wealthy and helped them build a massive empire that stretched across the entire world. While the British were building their spice empire, they had to fight many battles against the Dutch. The two nations were rivals for a long time. They fought on the sea with large wooden ships that carried many heavy cannons. These wars were very expensive and dangerous for everyone involved. Eventually, the British took full control of the island of Ceylon in the year 1796. This victory meant that they owned the best source of cinnamon on the planet. They could now set the prices and decide who was allowed to buy the spice in the busy European markets. The way the spice was harvested also became more professional during this period. The workers learned how to peel the bark from the branches with great skill. They used special tools to make sure they did not damage the inner part of the tree. After the bark was removed, it was left to dry in the warm sun. As it dried, the bark naturally curled into the beautiful shapes that we call quills today. The British were very strict about the quality of the spice. They wanted to make sure that every piece sent to Europe was perfect and smelled wonderful for their many customers. This period of history was not just about business and money. It also changed the lives of the people living in the region forever. The traditional way of life for many families was interrupted by the new rules of the British East India Company. The local kings and leaders lost their power as the British took over the land and the trade routes. New roads and ports were built to help transport the spice from the inland farms to the big ships. This created a new connection between the small villages in Asia and the massive, crowded cities of Europe that were thousands of miles away. By the end of the 18th century, cinnamon was no longer as mysterious as it had been during the Middle Ages. People in Europe finally knew where it came from and how it was grown. However, it was still a very special item that represented status and wealth. The British East India Company controlled every step of the process, from the moment the seed was planted to the moment the spice was sold in a shop in London. They were in charge. This total control allowed them to become one of the most powerful companies that has ever existed in the history of the world. Today, this wonderful spice is grown in many warm countries across the globe and has become a common ingredient in most local kitchens. Countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and China now produce a huge part of the supply for the entire world. There are two main types of the spice that people use for their daily baking and cooking. Because it is now grown on very large farms, the cost has dropped significantly compared to the ancient past. It is no longer a luxury only for kings, but a simple joy that adds a warm and sweet flavor to our favorite holiday treats and hot drinks during the cold winter months. Modern science also looks at how this fragrant bark can help our health and make our bodies stronger. We can find it in every supermarket for just a few dollars, which is very different from the time when it was worth its weight in gold. It has traveled across the blue oceans and through many centuries of human history to be with us. This spice connects us to the ancient explorers and the brave traders of the old world that we read about in books. Next time you see a cinnamon, remember the long journey it took to reach your hands.